Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. This video I'll be reviewing the Adventures League module, the Heir of Orcus Verse 4, designed by Anthony Joyce for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links for your DM's Guild shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/Rogue Watson. Shouts to Platinum patrons Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Nick R, Andy, Manuel, and Basil, and Gold patrons RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy Nima, Marco Stade, Vicente, Gilberto, Sean, A.K., Cert to be Adam, Dead Lizard Lounge, Sam, Arash, Lumpy Spuds, Jerome, Fatboy619, Skalenia, Nick C. Thank you all very much for your support. Fun fact, I have reviewed all of the previous Heir of Orcus adventures. They are Adventures League modules. They obviously go in a certain order and have a certain level range specifically designed for them. The Heir of Orcus Verse 4, at this point, we are at level 8. So Tier 2 adventure, levels 5 to 10. Now, each one, the first two were very similar, released together, had a unique kind of video gamey 8-bit art style, dealt with cults and demons, introduced the cult of Zariel, the whole Orcus thing. And the third one, which I reviewed earlier this year in 2020, kind of went in a very left turn and explored a underground city of Dwerger that was basically like a cyberpunk Blade Runner-esque theme. It was very, very different and only seemed to be tangentially related to the whole Heir of Orcus thing. So I was curious to see what direction this next one would take. This one seems like more of a return to form. So we're back dealing with cultists. In this case, the Heir of Orcus is basically in league with Cthulhu. Literally just Cthulhu, because it's, public domain. So it provides a very fun dungeon crawl, which is pretty much all this is. You essentially get your initial quest on an airship. You will recognize the NPCs if you have played those previous Heir of Orcus modules, but they are not required, which I think is the smart way to do it. You can just do this as a, whatever one-shot module you want to. It says a 2 to 4 hour adventure, which is technically a one-shot, but I mean, technically it's just one dungeon. If you ignore all the bonus objectives, then maybe you could get away with having it be, I don't know. The one dungeon alone is a lot of combat, so I still fail to see how you could try to do that in that little amount of time, but that's not taking away from how good this module is. I mean, you get your call to action, which is just, you get the quest from these familiar NPCs. Again, if you've played the previous Heir of Orcus' adventures, you'll recognize Sir Titus or Gertz, and then the actual cultist of Zariel. And you can choose in those first couple Heir of Orcus adventures to side with either essentially the good guys or the bad guys, or side with neither, which is called Chaos, and essentially you become more in tune with Cthulhu himself. And the neat thing is there are, you'll gain these story awards, which are like keywords at the end of completing certain Heir of Orcus modules, and then they will actually come into play in these future ones. And this one, I think, does finally have some really fun payoffs and fun callbacks, both on those familiar NPCs, as well as if you have those certain keywords and certain NPCs will treat you differently. For example, the informant that you meet at the beginning of the dungeon will treat you differently if you sided with the Knights, because he's a cultist of Zariel, but he kind of works with... And what's interesting is both the Knights of Holy Judgment and the Cult of Zariel at this point are working together to thwart the Heir of Orcus, so it's a third party. Basically both these good and evil sides, which were facing each other, are now like, oh shit, they're like trying to awaken Cthulhu. That's kind of bad for everybody, so let's join forces and go after them. So I like the fact that you can kind of be aligned with both good and evil, but still you're basically still on the main quest, and that doesn't really change, except for, as I said, there's some different story beats, and the way NPCs react to you is a bit different. So when you get to the actual dungeon, I mean, technically it's divided into Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3, but honestly, it's just that the dungeon itself is divided into Part 2 and 3. It's just, you get the call to action, you're on the airship, you can talk to your NPCs, and then you're in this mega dungeon, which is mega. It's pretty good size. Caves of the Writhing Nightmare, which is a really well-designed dungeon. You can see we get full-color grid maps for all these different dungeon locations, which is awesome. There is a separate art zip file that includes DM and player versions, which is super thumbs up for me, always. And if you, I guess you can't really see from this embedded map, but there are actually multiple branching paths, which I think is also a great, I mean, it literally looks like tentacles with all these different caves and stuff, just a really cool design. And of course, there's the final climax, all roads lead to Cthulhu. And it determines, and it even tells you right here, many paths lead to Cthulhu, which main route you go down, but there are, of course, different side routes, and it's designed where, at the beginning, you're probably going to be led towards the informant, and then his reaction to the players will determine, and especially versus, you might recognize this informant if you've played the previous Heir of Orcus adventures, but if not, then it can still work. It'll just give you those optional payoffs if you've previously played those modules, which I think, in general, I would give a thumbs up to. It's just that the first two really need to be played like back to back, because I don't think the first one ended very well from what I remember. It's been a while since I reviewed them. And then that third one is just such a kind of different offshoot that it doesn't even feel like it's part of the same campaign. This one, though, really has very strong theming. It's just basically this dungeon crawl. I like the multiple branching paths. There's a good balance between some role-playing moments. As I mentioned, you can find the informant. There's another section where you find this just massive bodies just stuck together. There's different horror stuff I can't name it on the top of my head, but have done that concept of just melding together. And it's not even you'd think it was a stat block or something they have to fight. It's not. It's a bunch of, human centipedes that are like just screaming out for help. And the whole time, players are having to make saves against madness. And there's, at the very entrance, there's this cultist who's lost their mind, and there's just mouths sprouting up out of their hands and feet. Like, it's all very, very Cthulhu-esque, Lovecraftian horror. It nails all of that theming very, very well. So if you're into that, frankly, if you just want to run a Lovecraftian dungeon, if you just want to plop this into whatever campaign, I think this is worth the purchase of that alone, because it's well designed. There's some cool stuff going on. It's got stat blocks for all the creatures, including Starspawn, Grooze, and Starspawn Hulk, which are different flavors of that kind of creature. And then the actual boss has transformed into a Starspawn, but can still retain his personality. And then he's trying to escape with his newfound form, although the party can certainly interrupt that as well. But there's a lot of cool. I like the branching paths. I like the way the combat plays out. I like the different role-playing and exploration aspects. I think it's a really fun, well-designed dungeon, and it really does nail that Cthulhu theme very, very well. And something that the designer has done, I think they did this for the previous Heir of Orcus as well, is provide an example of how to use the different pillars for all these different areas. Namely, if things devolve into combat, which most, a lot of combat situations are combat, how exploration works, which exploration is always a tricky pillar, but to me it's always like puzzles, traps, looking around, finding new areas, secret doors, thinking outside the box when it comes to different solutions. Like, all of that is kind of under the exploration pillar, and then, of course, socialization, which is all just role-playing, which usually can involve different skill checks, or it can just involve really good role-playing, and the designer does include these as very useful sidebars throughout the dungeon. But really nice formatting and layout, which I always expect from Joyce's productions. Like, I love the tentacles on every page. There's very cool artwork throughout. There's really cool NPC pictures, which I think are being reused from the previous Heir of Orcus adventures, as most of these are reoccurring NPCs, which is fun. And just, the production value is incredible, because we get over a dozen pages of NPC role-playing notes as well as stat blocks. Something this module does is provide stat blocks for every single creature and NPC that's ever mentioned in this adventure, which is very, very nice, because a lot of times folks will just say, hey, I'm using a, blink dog or a ghoul or something. You can look it up on this page of the monster manual. But what the designer does here is actually list all of these creatures here. Now, some of them are, unique to this adventure, so you'll have certain NPCs. But others are, just stuff like Intellect Devourer, like that's involved in one of the side objectives, or Minotaur. There's the cool one, Starspawn Hulk and Starspawn Mangler. So every single, it's just really nice to have, I think, is just all the stat blocks right here as an all-in-one. Now, the bonus objectives, which is what basically Adventurers League modules count anything that's a side quest. These are easily the best ones I've ever seen in an Adventurers League module, and apparently they were actually designed by a second designer, which I wrestled on whether to credit them in the beginning or not, Jeremy Forbing. The cover actually mentions both names, Anthony Joyce and Jeremy Forbing. However, the DM's Guild listing only mentions Joyce's name, so that's what I went with. But Forbing apparently did do the bonus objectives, and they are incredible. They're very, very, very well done. They are side quests that involve you starting on the airship. You basically, when you get the main quest mission, which is just to go to that nightmare cave dungeon and go kick that guy's ass, prevent him from becoming a threat as part of the Heir of Orcus cult. You get 2 other side quests, and both of them involve the Heir of Orcus cultists up to no good. One of them, the Midnight Carriage, kind of has a really cool intro to it. There was an old movie, I forgot what it was, but it involved like the similar concept where this like evil ghostly carriage and somebody has to get into it and flies away. Somebody hopefully is watching this can remind me about what the hell that was. I think it's called like a banshee or something as Irish folklore. I don't remember. I don't even know if it was horror because I think I watched it when I was younger. But the concept here is this family is cursed, and every full moon or whatever, this ghostly carriage comes down with this death knight at the helm, and all these pulled by nightmare steeds, and loads up a member of the family and takes them to an evil thing happening, and they have to witness that thing as part of this family curse. And the person has contacted the quest givers, and they tell the players to go help him because he's been seeing some stuff that's has to do with the cult of Orcus, basically. So you end up going to this cave area, which again we get. This is unfortunately not a grid map, but I do like the way this map looks a lot. And you find cultists have basically chained up this poor dwarf woman, and she's screaming about her children, and you don't really know what's going on. Interestingly enough, when you exit the ghostly carriage, and it does mention the fact that you could fight this battle with this Death Knight and all this stuff, but it's not a very, you're not supposed to fight it, and you're supposed to learn from the knight who's been cursed, who you accompany, that he's already tried that, basically. He's fought them, had a bunch of allies, all the allies were slain, they were able to kill the Death Knight, but then the Death Knight just came back with all the nightmares later on, so that's something to tell the players, is like, because, a lot of players are just going to fight things, and I know the type. So that's an important thing to get across. Like, you can fight them, it's not going to change what's going on here. Instead, you're supposed to actually go accompany this ghost carriage to this cave where you find this dwarf woman chained up and a bunch of cultists essentially torturing her because they've got her children. And the children are eggs in a cave with intellect devourers on leashes. And if they blow the whistle, the intellect devourers start devouring the minds and taking over the body of these half-dragon egg. So it turns out the dwarf woman is an adult silver dragon in disguise, which is awesome. I love that twist. And when the players exit the carriage, multiple things happen. They get to be invisible, which is cool. So they get the ultimate scouting opportunity, and the actual knight who they're trying to help has to then battle the Death Knight. And it's very smartly, the designer mentions, don't obviously run this as a full combat because it's just between NPCs. Instead, just track either the time or the number of rounds as they battle each other. And the Death Knight would eventually slay our good guy knight, but that gives the players kind of an interesting time limit. And he's for it. He's like, go stop this, and I'll keep him busy, but I'm not gonna last forever. So I thought that was just it's an interesting scenario. It's really cool. You can help out a silver dragon. You get rewards for that, and the fact that it's a twist where you learn what she is by finding the eggs potentially could be really cool. The fact that you're invisible when you start, so you can go scout it out. It's just really, really interesting. I mean, this could be a mini adventure in of itself, like just a little bit more, expanded in the beginning and end, and that could be a whole adventure. Instead, it's a side quest in this adventures module. And then the second one is a little bit less compelling, but it does feature a talking dog, which is always a good play. Always a good play. You get the mission that another person has found cult activities, but when you get there, that person is killed. You find their body, and all that's left is their dog, but she awakened the dog. She cast the awaken spell. And so you get to talk with this talking dog. And the dog, it's really funny. It's a... Due to his grief over Elaine, combined with the new self-awareness and existential confusion of his awakened intelligence, Otho sees his life as devoid of meaning. Anything but mourning over the body of his beloved former master seems pointless. So you have to deal with this dog who's having an existential crisis, this suddenly gaining sentience, and the potential for role-playing is just fantastic there. The actual place is a tavern that you go in. bunch of ne'er-do-wells, but nobody really knows about the evil stuff going on underneath. There's a really interesting section where you go into all these rooms, and there's actually a D20 you can roll to see what kind of events happen, and most of them are just, social role-playing fun stuff, maybe a little bit of combat. And then when you get to the actual bottom, it's basically just one combat scene. Kind of a similar situation, unfortunately, to what's happening in the main quest, which is somebody trying to transform into a star spawn monstrosity by having a captured person there. So that part's a little bit overlapping, but it's still, I mean, the talking dog, the tavern with evil shit going on underneath, like it, and then of course the Cthulhu stuff at the bottom definitely nails the theme. I do like at one point there's a bunch of like teenage girls who are all like kind of part of the cult, but they're also just trying to act natural, but they want to be in it. Like, it's just the role-playing potential for this whole sequence just seems really, really fun. And again, these are all like mini adventures in of themselves that are absolutely fantastic, and these are just side quests, so you could choose to run them or not run them. Oh, there's a good example of the maps at the end, so player and DM versions of each. So extremely impressive bonus objectives throughout. Absolutely love it. I think it's time to go over our pros and cons as I gush about the Heir of Orcus Verse 4. Pros: Caves of the Writhing Nightmare, which is this one, is a twisted dungeon dripping with Far Realm themes. And what I mean by that is it nails, if you want to do a Cthulhu Lovecraftian style dungeon, Far Realm, this is a great dungeon for that. It offers multiple branching paths, there's combat potential, there's role-playing potential. It's filled with exploration. There's a lot of little offshoots and niches and things to go in. You can make your final battle easier by going and destroying some of these other enemies in these other pocket rooms. Otherwise, they come up behind you and attack you, and then the final boss battle seems very satisfying because he's got a lot of cool special abilities, especially with his minions. That makes it very interesting. So I really like the design of this dungeon, which is good because that's basically what this adventure is it's this dungeon. Pro: excellent bonus objective side quests that serve as their own mini adventures. I was gushing to death about how good those side objectives are. Really fun. We get maps for them. They provide really cool scenarios, and I do think they overlap nicely with the themes of Cthulhu cultists up to no good. Pro: over a dozen pages of creature stat blocks and role-playing details for important NPCs. This is the Dramatis Personae, as well as having I just love having all these stat blocks here. Don't make me look stuff up in other material. It's awesome. And then all these little pictures, as well as role-playing notes for all the different characters. Some of them are carried over and you only see them in Act 1, but others you meet in those side quests or on the main quest. Pro: full color maps for each dungeon location, including DM and player versions. Huge thumbs up for that. Love to see it. And pro: fun but optional callbacks to previous Heir of Orcus adventures and NPCs. I like especially the story awards that say, hey, if your players, essentially, it's like a choose your own adventure, campaign at that point. Like if your players made this choice and they've sided with the good, then when they meet the Cult of Zariel informant, he's not going to be very happy to discuss with them. Whereas if they've sided with the Cult of Zariel, and they meet the informant, then he'll be thrilled and immediately tell them what's going on and give them his, magic item hat. So I really like those acknowledgments without having it be a requirement and have it be so, dialed in that you have to have played those previous adventures as well. Cons: if you haven't noticed, I've had no complaints about this adventure, and I have no cons whatsoever. It is absolutely fantastic, and definitely I believe that makes it my favorite Heir of Orcus adventure. Final verdict: the Heir of Orcus Verse 4 provides a straightforward but well-designed Adventures League dungeon crawl in a richly themed cavern full of Cthulhu, monstrosities, and madness. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at RogueWatson.com. You can support my work at Patreon.com/RogueWatson. You can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.